In less than a week, so to say, to the February 16 presidential elections in Nigeria, there are a lot of concerns as regards INEC's readiness to conduct a free, fair, credible elections. These are issues we'd like to iron out today. And with me in the studio, I have the Director General of the African Action Congress, Dr. Malcolm Fabiyi. Dr. Malcolm, it's a pleasure having you on Saharatv again.
It's a pleasure to be here.
A lot of concern about INEC's readiness to conduct these elections, not only by the opposition political parties, but even critical stakeholders and the foreign communities. What's your party's position on the readiness of INEC to actually conduct a free, fair, credible, and transparent elections come to February 16, 2019?
Well, I think there are several components to what an electoral body like INEC needs to do. There are perhaps three parts to an election. The first one is the registration, where you're trying to make sure that the voters are ready and that people go out and get their registrations done. The second one is the process of making sure that those cards, those registration cards, are made available and that those that are not picked up are secured. And the third aspect of it is what actually happens on election day itself. I think we've had the opportunity so far to see INEC conduct the first part, which is the registration part. 84 million Nigerians are now registered to vote. I think Nigerians can look at what INEC has done. Yes, there were some imperfections, but by and large, 84 million Nigerians have been registered. A significant number of those Nigerians have picked up their voter cards. The third component, which is the one all of us are worried about, is what actually happens on election day. And when it comes to what's going to happen on election day, you know, our position is very simple. Our position is that it's going to take, we would want to remind the party in power that they got into office because the Nigerian people and the international community was determined to make sure in 2015 that we had free and fair elections. If we didn't have free and fair elections, there was no way an opposition party could have won. Our duty as Nigerians, and certainly this is something we're doing at the level of our party, is to make sure that we not only rely on INEC and the security forces to secure those elections, securing the elections, making sure that they are as free and fair as possible, is something that is our collective duty. So at our own level as a party, one of the things we've done is we've created an app, an election monitoring app, that any Nigerian, regardless of their party affiliation, can actually download. If it's an Android app, anybody can go to Google Store, download the app. It's called AAC Take It Back. And what that app actually does is on election day, as soon as the results are announced at each polling booth, because this is what's going to happen in the 120,000 polling units in the country, at the end of the election process, the votes will be counted, tallied, and the winners announced. And then a sheet of paper that has all of those results is going to be posted. What we want Nigerians to do with that app is to immediately type in the numbers of the winners and losers at each polling unit, take a picture. As soon as they hit send, it goes into a centralized database, and we will make sure, along with INEC, along with everybody else that's monitoring these elections, that Nigerians have an unvarnished, unadulterated outlay of the results of those elections. So everybody has a role to play. That's the role that we've set for ourselves, is that of providing and producing this platform. And we're hoping Nigerians will join us in that regard. One
of the major concerns of most Nigerians are the critical infrastructures that is going to be provided by INEC. Could it be compromised? For example, these are so-called app that your party is actually, how could it be trusted that it will not be compromised? Isn't that a cause for worry for some?
Well, so look, it is true that technology can be compromised, but at the same time, there are also safeguards. So there are voter verification cards. During the election itself, people have PVCs. The first part of the election is going to be the verification exercise, where it's not everybody who turns up with a card that probably has a card that is actually a legal card that can be used in the elections. So we need to think about the card systems, the card scanners, making sure that the critical infrastructure around those are actually secure. And then there are people like us that are third parties that are completely offline. We're not doing anything in conjunction with INEC. What our systems and those of any other election monitors would rely on would be, one, the ability to transmit data without having that data breached, the ability even to have the amount of data that you need, access to the type of data that you need to send, a lot of text and a lot of pictures over the airwaves, so that you are moving that information from wherever those polling units are to the collation centers or the data centers, or rather the collation centers that we're going to be working from. So there are those concerns, but the reality is it's all technology. It's not rocket science. Today, people's accounts are on simple credit cards, right? You take your credit card, your entire life savings can actually be pulled out of that card. So the same type of security, the same type of data and technology processes that help us secure those types of infrastructures are available to INEC, and they're certainly available to people like us, and we're making use of them.
Another issue that is of primary concern has to do with the polling stations. 120,000 polling stations is going to be used for these elections. How well is your party satisfied with INEC's creation of awareness, allowing voters to be able to know where these voting stations are, as well as the issues of voting materials getting to designated places on elections day? What's your view on INEC's preparedness in that regard? Are you satisfied?
So here's the thing. I would say INEC is probably as prepared as INEC potentially can be. We've had lots of elections. So certainly since 1999, we've had, this is probably what, the 8th. So 99, 2003, 2007, 2011, 15, and now. We've had at least about 6 cycles. And at each stage, we've all worried about INEC's preparedness. We've all worried about whether ballot boxes will get where they're supposed to get to, whether card scanners would work, more recently over the last 2 electoral cycles. But somehow, it's the Nigerian spirit. We may be late, but we'll get there eventually. I think INEC certainly would be prepared. There are 120,000 polling units, that is true. I feel confident based on what we saw in 2015, where technology was used significantly for the first time, that with the card readers and those types of technology systems within the elections. I think INEC did creditably then. Were there issues? Yes. Were there complaints? Yes. But given what INEC did in 2015, I think if they can build on that, I am hopeful that we should certainly see them being prepared to at least make sure that they can superintend the elections that are coming up in less than 2 weeks, as you've indicated. Some
critical stakeholders have also made this assertion that the transmission and collation of results are subject to interference, manipulations, and meddlings. Especially if INEC's favorite political party win, there will be a lot of infractions, as evidenced in what happened in Osun, where elections were declared inconclusive and they had to go for a rerun. Do you see that ever happening in this election?
It could happen. So when we tell you...
what will your party do?
So this is what our party is doing. So in every election, the magic, as I call it, happens between the polling unit and the collation center. So here is what will happen during the elections. 84 million registered voters, or a fraction of them, will turn up at their polling units, 120,000 polling units. They will go through a verification exercise to ensure that they are eligible to vote. You asked a question earlier. Every single Nigerian that has a PVC actually knows where their polling unit is, because your PVC has 2 numbers. One number on your PVC is your actual VIN. That's your voter identification number. It's a unique number to each voter. The other number on the PVC, just above the picture, is actually your polling unit number. It has 4 digits. The first 2 digits represent the state. The next 2 represent the local government area in that state. The next 2 represent the ward in that local government. And the final 3 digits represent the polling unit within that ward. So every voter knows exactly where they're going to vote. Where you're going to vote is likely to be where you actually registered. Here's what we plan to do. As the elections are completed in every polling unit, in the 120,000 polling units in this country, the polling agents, the people from INEC, the electoral officers, will count the votes. The electoral officers will announce the votes. The electoral officers will write down the results, and the agents of each of the parties will sign. Then they will take that sheet of paper and they will paste it on the wall. Once that is done, they will then bring that sheet of paper down, pack up the ballot boxes, put it in a vehicle, and move that to a collation center. So the true results will be what is happening in those 120,000 polling units. What used to happen in the past is whatever happens in a polling unit stays in a polling unit. And then what we hear is what happens at the collation center. The reality is, if I have a polling unit, so 120,000 polling units, 84 million voters, it means the average polling unit has 700 people. Only 100, now remember this, 84 million registered voters. Only about 27, 28 million Nigerians vote. So what used to happen in the past is the 50 million people wouldn't turn up, their ballot sheets are fair game. Be in transit, that is when party agents begin thumbing those ballot sheets. So what we're determined to do and what we're asking Nigerians to do is to make sure that let us know what happens in the polling unit. Because what happens in the polling unit, those are the real results. And as long as we know those results, as long as those results are communicated, as long as people are taking pictures, using apps from platforms like ours and others, then Nigerians will actually know the truth and the reality of what is happening on election day. The only way we can safeguard this election is if Nigerians, if every Nigerian actually don't turn up at the polls only to vote, but turn up at the polls determined to ensure that they also secure the elections. So I'm absolutely confident that with the efforts we're making and with the efforts that a lot of other people are making, that we'll be able to not only ensure that we have a safe voting and a safe and peaceful voting process, but that we're also going to be able to secure those elections. It is our duty. And we're not leaving this to just INEC and the security forces.
We'd like to also know your party's position on the retention of the INEC National Commissioner, Mrs. Amina Zakari, has become a cause of concern for most of the opposition. What's your party's position on this, as far as fairness and integrity of the electoral process is concerned, if there are alleged relationships between the National Commissioner and the presidency?
Our presidential candidate has been very clear. His view is that honor requires that she step down. If she's an honorable person look, when you are an electoral officer, it's not just the letter of the law that's important. The spirit of the law is also important. Appearances matter. If I was the lady, I would step down. Stepping down doesn't mean you leave your position. Stepping down simply means you recuse yourself. It doesn't mean you're no longer working for INEC. It just means that in this critical election, you've decided you're not going to participate. What we've heard from INEC, which is somewhat encouraging, is that she is not going to be involved in the presidential elections. So she'll be involved in the gubernatorial and perhaps other elections. So I think it's a step in the right direction. We wished she would go one step further and decide to completely remove herself from the process. But I think what INEC has decided to do is a step in the right direction. She will not be taking part in the presidential elections.
One more issue that has also crossed the minds and raised the fears of all stakeholders has to do with the ability of INEC to conduct a credible electoral processes is the failure of the president to actually assent to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. Do you have a reaction on this?
Well, so that was a hot button issue. It's clear that the president is not going to sign it. Would it have improved the electoral process? I think yes, there were certain aspects of that bill that probably would have. But here's the reality. The reality again is what we have is what we're going to have to use. And what we're using is what was used in 2015. And this is the way I think about it. If what was used in 2015 could enable an opposition party that didn't have the powers of incumbency, that did not control INEC, that certainly didn't control the security forces, if it could allow them to have a chance, a fair chance, at winning an election. I think what we have, with whatever issues it may have, if we collectively as Nigerians decide that we're going to make this work, that law as it stands today can still work. So would we have wanted him to sign it? Yes, there were certain aspects of it that would have improved the process, but he didn't. So we will work with what we have, and we're absolutely convinced that regardless of the challenges that are posed by the existing laws, that given the work that we've done, the work that our party has done, the work that our candidate Omoyele Sowore has done, we're absolutely confident that we've done enough and we continue to do more to try to convince the Nigerian people that we are certainly the ones who can help deliver the type of Nigeria that they all dream about.
Away from INEC, we're looking also at the issue of the town hall series that we had recently on the national TV, where presidential candidates of major political parties were put on stage for Nigerians to observe. I mean, your presidential candidate, Mr. Omoyele Sowore, was on a town hall session, was actually grilled by the president, Kaderia Mahakbet, and one of his last statements was that will he accept the results of the election? And in answer, he said, if the election is free and fair, he will accept it. What does that tell you about your party?
Well, so it tells us two things. So I'm glad you brought up the issue of the town hall series. Obviously the establishment, APC and PDP, they didn't want to debate us. And I'm sure you know that the NEDG bond debates were, they were manipulated. We were refused to be on that platform. And even so, they didn't even debate. So both Buhari and Atiku refused to participate in the NEDG bond debates. However, they were forced to take part in the town hall series. And this is what I want Nigerians to actually understand about the town hall series. Only 4 parties out of the 91 political parties were invited. Those 4 parties were selected by a vigorous polling exercise where the top 4 parties that polled across the country were the ones who eventually made it to that stage. That tells you something about our party. That even though we've only been around for less than a year, this party was actually registered officially in August. Our movement began earlier last year. But we have become one of the 3 major political parties in this country. Because for the last 58 years, and certainly over the last 20 years, nobody, no political party, none of the establishment parties has spoken and met the yearnings of the teeming Nigerian people. Now, to your question about whether or not we will accept the outcomes of a free and fair election, yes. So we will accept the outcomes of the election if they are free and fair. But what I've also told you is that we believe that part of the duty of every Nigerian is to make sure the elections are not only fair and peaceful, but that they are secure. So we understand that it is part of our duty to make sure that those elections are as free and fair as possible. That's why we've created an app. That is why we're asking Nigerians to join us, whether they are members of our party or not, in helping to secure those elections. So we're doing the utmost best that we can to make sure that after the elections are done, we can say, look, we did everything possible as a party to make sure that these elections were as free and fair as possible. We're not just waiting for the government to secure the elections. We're taking steps. I've just told you we've created an app. AAC, take it back. That's what anybody who has a cell phone, who has a smartphone, go on Google Play, go to it's an Android app, go online, download it. We are doing our utmost best to try to ensure that when the elections are done, that there will be no excuses from anyone, including ourselves, about the efforts that have been made to try to make sure that they are fair and they are credible.
One of the pivotal issues that was addressed during the town hall series has to do with the fight against corruption.
Yes.
What's your assessment on the way the present government has been fighting corruption, and based on their records and so to speak, what they presented to Nigerians at the Town Hall series, as well as the way APC intends to fight corruption as presented by their presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar. And what will your party, what incentives would you introduce that will address corruption differently from what the establishment parties are put out?
I think if there's one area where we are incredibly differentiated from the rest, not just the establishment parties, but from every other party that's actually taking part in these presidential elections and candidates, it's in the area of corruption, of anti-corruption. So our presidential candidate, Omoyele Sowore, before people can tell you anything else is done, the first thing that they know is that he's an anti-corruption activist. In fact, if you look at what is happening right now, so there's this whole issue with Omogen, Walter Omogen, the Chief Justice of Nigeria. Guess what? All of a sudden they think Omogen was corrupt. Do you know that 2.5 years ago, Sowore, using Sahara reporters as a platform, actually reported that this man was living beyond his means? And Sowore has made the case many times before now that most of the cases that are even being prosecuted by the EFCC are based on evidence and facts that were collected by him as an individual doing investigative journalism. So think about it. If as an individual, this man has actually done more, or at least as much as the anti-corruption agencies in the country, think of what would happen if you actually gave him the instruments of state, if he was enabled and empowered as the president of the nation to make sure that all our anti-corruption agencies were left unfettered. So here are the other things that I'll tell you. When it comes to the anti-corruption fight, there are several planks, about 3-4 planks that we're going to fight it on. We've said we're going to give Nigerians 100,000 naira as a minimum wage. We believe that's one way to fight corruption. Because part of what makes people steal, especially those at the lowest levels, I mean, how can you pay somebody 18,000 naira a month and expect that a man, a wife, 2 or 3 children would feed, would have a home, would be able to send their children to school? If somebody fell ill, they will be able to take care of that person. It's impossible. So one of the things we've said is we're going to have a living wage, and that living wage is a wage that would ensure that every worker is at least going to have dignity. That if at those lowest levels, those workers then begin to dabble into things beyond, to try to make gains that are illegal, then in good conscience, we can say that, look, you shouldn't have done this because we're paying you a living wage. So that's number one, a living wage. A fair day's work should get a fair day's wage. The second one is technology. So one of the things that we've said we'll do as a party is to ensure that, look, all of those things that make corruption attractive, we should have a cashless society. Today, nobody moves around with wads of cash, but if you want to go get your driver's license, you're going to go pay in cash. If you want to go change your, update your vehicle license, your vehicle license plate, you're going to pay in cash. So moving things, using technology would also significantly ensure that we're moving and removing the temptations that come from just moving cash from point to point. I can go update my driver's license and nobody ever sees cash. I can go there, I can pay over the counter, I can do it online, I can do whatever I need to do. We're going to leverage technology to the utmost. The next one is transparency in terms of contracting. So today, we have a Corporate Affairs Commission that has all the companies in the country, but guess what? We know that most of the contracts in Nigeria are being awarded by the awardees of the contracts to themselves. Part of what we intend to do is to make sure that every procurement process is online. That's what is done around the world. You issue requests for proposals, RFPs. I don't even need to see a contractor before he gets a contract. The RFP states all the requirements, and if you meet the requirements, you respond to it. And there are set criteria that are going to be used to assess who we should give the job to and who we shouldn't give the job to. And one of the things we're determined to do is to put the entire Corporate Affairs Commission database online. So any Nigerian can go there, a contract gets awarded, we're going to announce who got the award, and any Nigerian can go check who owns those companies. Then, and that's also tied to whistleblowing, because there is no act of corruption that doesn't have witnesses. There's somebody who typed up the forms. There's somebody who, even if they want to use proxies on their companies, there's somebody they're using as a proxy. There's somebody who knows somebody is being used as a proxy. Part of what we're determined to do is to make sure that, look, if you know people are corrupt, today, as much as 5% of the proceeds of that corrupt act can go to a whistleblower. We're going to take whistleblowing to the next level. So by giving people a living wage, leveraging technology, making sure that there is transparency in terms of contracting, and then leveraging whistleblowing, those are 4 separate elements that, in addition to just ensuring that there's no interference in the process itself, we're not going to be playing these games where, because elections are coming, you're going to be digging up old cases against somebody like Onogen. It's not surprising. They appointed Onogen less than 6 months ago. Guess what? We'd already told them, Sowore certainly had told them over 2.5 years ago that the man was corrupt, yet they used him. And when Nigerians look at the alternative, I mean, Atiku and Obi sat in the town hall series, and Atiku told Nigerians that he was basically going to give amnesty to people that had been corrupt. The people who have been corrupt in this country don't need amnesty. We need justice. They need to be prosecuted. So the reality is, we believe that we are completely differentiated. There's a track record. Sowore has not only talked about anti-corruption, that is how he has lived his life. He has established himself as a foremost anti-corruption crusader. And I believe that if there's one reason, apart from many of the others, that Nigerians should have to trust him with their votes, it's the fact that they can rest assured that he will do in office what he has done for almost 30 years as an individual fighting to move this nation forward.
Now, how would your party mobilize the grassroots movements of integrity to stand up to the political machines of either party that we have talked about, who have already sold out? And what will how's your party reaching out to the individual citizens to be agents of change within a political system that has actually failed them?
So here's what we're doing. We are engaging at the grassroots level. As I'm speaking with you, Sowore, the presidential candidate of our party, is in Benin. He's finishing the final leg of a 6-zone tour. He is the only candidate that has actually gone to every geopolitical zone, not once, but at least twice. He's doing the second round now. He has been to every single state in this country. He has been to over 200 cities. He has taken the message of change to every single marketplace that we can, not just him, but our supporters as well. So in terms of grassroots engagement, there is absolutely no one, and that is our candid opinion, not based on highfalutin ideas, but actually just based on our read of what is going on the ground. There is no party and no candidate that has done what our party and our candidate has done in terms of engaging with the Nigerian people.
Okay. A major argument given by people who agree with your politics more than they agree with either APC or the PDP, but are using their time and energy now, unfortunately, so to say, now to elect them, is that there's a very remote chance that your party candidate could win this election. Do you really think your party can win in the forthcoming election?
Here's what I'll say about remote chances. If somebody had told us that an opposition party would beat an incumbent party that was spending billions of dollars on an election, that elected an INEC chairman, that controlled the law enforcement agencies, if they told us that was possible in 2015, we would have told them they were smoking something. And we would have been justified. Why? Because it had never happened before. If somebody had told us that a minority president would win a free and fair election in 2011, that somebody who was not Hausa, Yoruba, or Igbo would be the main person on a political ticket, and that person would win an election, we would have told them it was impossible. But guess what? Nigeria is a nation where impossibilities become possible. So here's what we're going to say. Now, if somebody had told us that students and youth would have chased a military dictator away from power, we would have said it was impossible. But guess what? In 1993, when the June 12 elections were annulled, Babangida did it not because he loved Nigeria. He did it because he wanted to perpetuate himself in office. Guess what happened? There was a young man who was president of the University of Lagos Students' Union, who, along with a number of other Nigerians, stood up and said that wasn't going to happen. He was a student. That man's name is Sowore. He is the presidential candidate of our party. Now, we're not just going ahead having wishful thinking. We know it's possible, and we're doing the work that is needed to make it possible. So as I speak to you, as I explained to you earlier, our candidate is not sitting at home somewhere wishing that things would happen. He's actually out there working. People like myself and hundreds of thousands others, volunteers across the country and across the world. Because not only do we have a large following within the country, we also have a significant diaspora component. There are Nigerians all over the world. Any Nigerian that has left this country, they've not left the country because they want to leave the country. They've left the country because Nigeria has failed to provide them with an enabling environment. But guess what? They are working hard to make sure that we create that enabling environment here as well. So we're not just wishing, we're not just hoping, we're actually out there working. And what we believe Nigerians will see is that on February 16th, they will see that the wishes, hopes, and aspirations of the Nigerian people will be crystallized, and eventually we'll be able to get the Nigeria of our dreams. Here's what I'll add as well. I told you earlier that only 4 parties were invited to the Candidates Forum. It was sponsored by MacArthur. It was a collaboration between NTA and Daria Media. The 4 parties that were selected were not just arbitrarily selected. A significant amount of polling was done. Those are the top 4 parties in the country. If we had told you, if anybody had told you 4 years ago that in 2019, that there would be a party called the African Action Congress that would be part of the top 4 parties in the country, in a nation that has parties that have been around. There are many parties that have been in this country for at least the 20 years since we started, 20 years since 1999 when we started this recent republic. If anybody had told you that, you would have told them they were dreaming. But it's a reality. Sowore was on that platform. Our party was represented. Our party is one of Nigeria's top 4 political parties. So anybody that tells us we can't do this, they are ignoring the facts. They're ignoring the reality. The reality is this thing is for real. Nigeria will change. Nigeria must change. Look, just go out into the streets. So, and then when they talk about structures, you know, they show these rallies where there are 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people. So here's what I'll tell you. When you look at an APC rally and a PDP rally comes around the next week, the faces in the crowds are exactly the same. I will tell you what it costs. Each person that you see costs on average about 5,000 naira. So when you see 20,000 people, they have just spent 100 million naira to stage that rally. It's a staged rally. When we have engagements, we do what we call retail politics. It's one-on-one. The way you convince people is not with billboards and banners. When I want to convince somebody, I need to engage that person. I need to talk to that person. That's the type of politics we do. It's the politics of town halls. It's the politics of engagement in the streets. It is retail politics. It's the politics of the street corner. It's the politics where we engage with people and we let them know that this country can fundamentally change. We're bringing something different to Nigerian politics. So yes, they may not see us on billboards. They may not see us on a lot of the TV shows and programs. But what is undeniable is that we are on the ground, we are working, we are sweating, we are toiling, we are engaging with the Nigerian people. And on February 16th, they are in for a surprise.
One final question. What message would you want to give to a Nigerian electorate about the kind of candidates they are to vote for come February 16, 2019?
February 16, 2019, we should vote for a candidate that has walked the talk. We shouldn't only vote for people who say they're going to do stuff. The question we must ask them is, what is your track record? What have you done? What have you done in the past that should convince us that you can do this thing you're telling us to do? Right now, we have an incumbent that has failed in the 3 years that we've given to them. In fact, it is his second round of failure, because this is not the first time that he is president of this country. When I was in secondary school in 1983, Buhari was head of state. It's the second time around. So he has failed twice. So look at their records. The man has failed and is asking you to put him in again because somehow failure is going to turn to success. It doesn't happen that way. It's going to be his third time at the helm. He failed twice already. He is likely to fail again. So what we ask Nigerians for, what I'll plead with Nigerians to think carefully about is look at every candidate, weigh them. Ask yourself the question, who has been here working for the Nigerian people selflessly? Who has been here that has put their life and their livelihood at risk for the Nigerian people? Which of those candidates has been with Nigeria and Nigerians at each juncture of all the major issues that Nigeria has had? I'll tell you this very clearly, without fear of contradiction, that the only candidate that has spent most of his life working for the Nigerian people is Omoyele Sowore. For 30 years. I met him for the first time as an undergraduate at the University of Lagos. There is nothing that has happened in this country in the last 30 years that that man has not been a part of. June 12, 1993, he was the one that led the youth and student revolt against that. The restoration of democracy in 1999, he was part of the pro-democracy movement that made that happen. Ensuring that Obasanjo did not become another Mugabe, when other media centers and when other media platforms were unable, and even the political system were unable to speak truth to power, he was able to speak truth to power. When Yar'Adua was dead and dying, and a cabal was trying to convince Nigerians that he could continue to rule in a comatose state, and they refused and didn't want to transfer power to a minority president who eventually turned out to be Goodluck Jonathan, there was only one person who had the guts to actually come out and tell Nigerians the truth. And that was Omoyele Sowore. And in 2015, we must not forget that part of the reason why we could have fairly credible elections was because while INEC was doing their thing, platforms like Saharatv, which Sowore created, were also streaming in real time the outcomes of those results. Those are the things we're building on. So that is why I am absolutely convinced that Omoyele Sowore is the person Nigerians should be looking at. But don't take my word for it. Look at the body of work. Look at what he has done. And when you look at what all these people have done, I am absolutely convinced that when Nigerians do that, they will know for a fact that this is somebody that they can trust, not just Nigeria to, but the future of their children too as well.